The announcement of Papa Essiedu as Severus Snape in the new Harry Potter series stirred up a huge reaction. And no, it wasn't just because he's a black actor. The shock came mainly from the fact that this casting decision involved a character like Snape, who has always had a very specific visual identity in the books. The show has been marketed as a faithful adaptation of the original books, which got a lot of fans excited. After all, many have long felt that the films left out crucial details, but when Snape's casting was revealed, the tone shifted. Some embraced the decision, others felt it was a mischaracterization, and that's where the real debate began. Snape is a character whose entire presence, from day one, has relied heavily on a distinct aesthetic that shaped how other characters and the readers perceived him. The books describe him with sallow skin, greasy black hair, a hooked nose, a gloomy, unsettling appearance. And that's not just a throwaway detail. It's a crucial part of why people instinctively mistrust him. He fits the classic villain look from the very first scene. It's precisely because he looks dark, odd, and out of place that he becomes a target for the Marauders' bullying, is rejected by Lily, and is seen as a threat by Harry. His eerie look, combined with his cold demeanor and the way he treats students, makes everyone believe he's a Death Eater. And that's also why the plot twist, the revelation of who he truly is, hits so hard. No one expects that guy to become one of the story's most tragic and loyal figures. So when that signature image is altered, especially through a change in ethnicity for a character who was visually tied to paleness and coldness, the impact isn't just visual. It potentially shifts how audiences interpret his relationships with other characters. And that's where the questions begin. Will the Marauders' bullying, once viewed as classic schoolyard cruelty, now feel more racially charged? Will Lily's rejection be read differently? And what about Harry's early mistrust? How will that land with audiences now? These aren't things the series has to spell out. They arise organically from collective perception. And that's why this casting choice surprised so many people. Not because of representation, but because of how this change might affect the way viewers read dynamics that were once understood in a completely different light. In the Harry Potter books, Snape wasn't just a mysterious teacher. He was written in a way that made his physical appearance part of the storytelling. It was designed to make readers feel uneasy. Right from the start, he's described as pale-skinned, with lank, greasy black hair, a hooked nose, and a stiff demeanor. He looked sickly, cold, almost lifeless. And that was on purpose. That appearance directly feeds into the sense of menace he exudes. Harry sees Snape and immediately senses that something's off. His scar hurts, the air feels heavy, and he doesn't even know who the guy is yet. It's a layered construction that blends visuals, atmosphere, and narrative, all working together to plant doubt in the reader's mind. Snape looks like a villain from the get-go, but the story toys with that perception. We believe he's the antagonist, operating in the shadows. And then, much later, comes the twist. We find out he's actually the complete opposite of what we thought. And that's why many fans argue that his gothic, grim, borderline caricature-like look was essential to who he was. Now, when a black actor is cast in the role, that contrast changes. Because Snape wasn't just different, he was almost the embodiment of the outcast stereotype, a character judged purely by what he looked like. And that judgment was part of the story's core message: don't judge a book by its cover. The issue is, with this new casting, the reason for that judgment might shift from he's odd to he's different because he's black. Even if that's not the intent, perception could move in that direction. Because when you change a key visual trait that influenced how other characters reacted to Snape, you also risk altering how audiences interpret those reactions. And that's where things get more sensitive. Not because Snape can't be black, but because this shift might complicate the way certain character dynamics are read. Not due to the actor, or even the story itself, but because of how viewers process what they see. One of the main arguments that came up with Papa Essiedu being cast as Snape was this: will the way other characters treat him now come across as racism? To start, it's important to remember that in the books, Harry's first impression of Snape isn't baseless. Harry doesn't just randomly get a bad vibe from him. That scene is built around three very specific things: Snape's strange, intense stare, the sudden pain in Harry's scar, and Percy's comment, which plants a seed of suspicion by saying Snape knows dark arts and is after another teacher's job. Then, in potions class, Snape humiliates Harry for no reason. He comes in already picking a fight. He's harsh, not only with Harry, but also with Neville, and mocks the Gryffindor students in general. So Harry's dislike his context. It's not based on appearance or shallow impressions, it's rooted in Snape's behavior from day one. As for the Marauders, Snape's main rivals from the past, what we see isn't something that starts because of how Snape looks. The friction begins right on the Hogwarts Express, when Snape defends Slytherin and the Marauders, especially James and Sirius, immediately make fun of him for it. Things escalate over time, with attacks from both sides, until it becomes a rivalry rooted more in ideology and personal conflict than anything else. Sure, later on, the Marauders do mock Snape's appearance, calling him Snivelous, making fun of his hair, his nose, but that comes after the conflict is already established. The initial tension was never about how he looked. It was about the choices he made, the house he backed, and later on, the groups he associated with. Many of them aligned with the idea of blood purity. So even if Snape is played by a black actor in the show, the rejection he faces doesn't stem from racial prejudice. It's rooted in his behavior, his choices, and his worldview. That said, there's still a chance audiences will interpret these scenes differently, and not because the show will explicitly present it that way, but because visual context changes everything. What was once seen as school bullying, teenage rivalry, or ideological clashes might now be interpreted as targeted hostility toward a black character. Even if the storyline stays exactly the same as in the books, the emotional reaction from viewers could be very different. This is a point many people raised once the casting of a black Snape started gaining traction. If other characters are hostile toward him, will that come off as racism? Before jumping to conclusions, it's worth understanding how prejudice works within the Harry Potter universe. In the books, there's no social structure based on skin color. The kind of discrimination that exists is different. It's about blood purity. In other words, a wizard's value isn't judged by their appearance or ethnicity, but by their magical lineage, whether they're pureblood, half-blood, or muggle-born. That's the core conflict driving most of the social tension in the story. For example, the Malfoys look down on Hermione not because she's a girl, or based on how she looks, but because she's muggle-born. The Weasleys, despite being white and pureblood, are seen as blood traitors because they welcome people from other backgrounds. Under Voldemort's control, the Ministry of Magic erects a statue of wizards dominating muggles, and skin color is never mentioned as a factor in this oppression. There are black wizards in the series, like Blaise Zabini and his mother, who also uphold these elitist, prejudiced ideals. Their skin color doesn't stop them from supporting blood supremacy. This only reinforces the idea that the system of oppression in the wizarding world isn't racial, it's magical. That's why many argue that Snape being portrayed by a black actor doesn't change the social structure of the story. The prejudice he faces isn't racial. It's based on his actions, his beliefs, and his political alignment within the magical world. However, even if that's clearly laid out in the books, audiences today might interpret things differently, especially if they're already tuned in to racial discourse. The association between rejection and skin color might happen, even if the show doesn't frame it that way directly, and that's where the showrunners will need to be careful, whether through dialogue or how they frame relationships, to avoid leaving room for misreadings. Up to this point, we've been talking about how the characters in the story might react. But now, the conversation goes beyond the plot. When the news broke that Papa Essiedu had been cast as Snape, many people didn't just see it as an artistic choice. Some viewed it as a move specifically designed to make a statement, maybe even a deliberate one. The argument is that in recent years, Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling has become heavily associated with controversy, especially due to statements widely perceived as transphobic. Since then, any decision tied to the wizarding world has come under tighter public scrutiny. This has fueled a theory that casting a black actor as Snape might be a kind of response to all that, a way to regain support or signal alignment with progressive causes. But what drew the most criticism wasn't the inclusion itself, it was who was chosen for this kind of change. Snape isn't some secondary or neutral character. He's one of the most layered, morally complex, and narratively important figures in the entire series. His appearance plays a direct role in how others treat him, and that affects how readers interpret him too. Many have argued that if the goal was to promote diversity, there are other characters where such a change would have far less impact on the story or on how relationships are perceived. With Snape, This visual shift triggers a cascade of consequences that no one will be able to fully control once the show airs. There are also those who say this fuels long-standing criticism about so-called forced diversity. That is, when changes are made that don't stem from the original material, don't add meaningful value to the story, and seem to exist mainly to generate headlines, debate, and engagement. In that context, the result could end up being the opposite of what was intended. Rather than presenting representation in a natural and thoughtful way, it may come off as a strategic provocation, a move designed to stir buzz, even if it ends up splitting the fan base further, which, to be fair, is already happening. In the end, the conversation around Snape in the new Harry Potter series goes far beyond a simple casting change. What's truly at stake is how visual changes, even ones that seem small, can reshape the way audiences perceive characters, relationships, and conflicts in a story they already know. In the books, Snape is complex because his dark and eerie appearance is misleading. He looks like a villain, but he's not. He's rejected, but he's also flawed. His character is built on ambiguity, and when you alter a visual trait that was central to that ambiguity, like his pale, sickly appearance, it can shift how that character is read, even if the script remains untouched. Casting Papa Essiedu as Snape does bring representation, but it also raises questions about how that decision might affect viewer perception, especially in scenes where Snape faces rejection or hostility. Not because racism exists in the original text, but because the visual context has changed and modern audiences react differently now. This isn't about whether the actor is good or bad. It's about how the adaptation handles a character that has always been read through multiple layers. If the show manages to preserve Snape's depth and clearly communicate his internal and external conflicts, this new version might work beautifully. But if that nuance gets lost, interpretations might spiral out of control. At the end of the day, this discussion shows that adaptations are more than just aesthetic decisions. They carry cultural weight, and depending on how they're handled, they don't just update a story, they reshape how we connect with it. And that's a wrap. If you enjoyed this analysis, make sure to hit the like button to support the channel, subscribe so you don't miss upcoming videos, and drop a comment below. What do you think about this change to Snape? Could it work, or will it just add more confusion? Thanks for watching, and see you next time.